Hey everyone, Ryker here with Cordant Winery. I am extremely excited and honored to be presenting to you all our 2024 spring release of wines. We've worked tirelessly over the last 2 years to bring these wines to you guys. And so we thought it would be kind of fun to open them up in front of everybody before the release to kind of tell you a little bit about what we got going on, why we chose each wine, and give you a little bit of background on each wine as well. The first wine on here is 2022 Resolution. This is our Southern Rhone inspired white wine blend. We then are moving to the 2022 Hyperbole, which is a Central Coast designated blended Pinot Noir. We then have our 2021 Maniacal, which is, I guess you could call it GSM, but it's more of a Grenache based blend. And then finally finishing off with the 2021 Single Vineyard Coast View Syrah, 2022 Resolution. So as I mentioned, 2022 Resolution is a Southern Rhone inspired white wine. The reason we decide to go to this kind of area in the world, the Southern Rhone of France, is because climatically it's very similar to here in Paso Robles. We get really hot days, really cold nights. And then in terms of the soils, they're also very similar. A lot of this is grown on limestone. This is actually all from Paso Robles AVA. We source a little bit of fruit from the east side, a little bit of fruit from the west side. This particular vintage is primarily Viognier. It's got a little bit of Grenache Blanc. It then has a little bit of Roussanne, and then we finish it off with Picpoul. I know everyone always says Paso is a red wine region, but I love the whites from Paso Robles. There's something really interesting about the texture that a white wine from a Mediterranean climate brings. It almost has tannin, kind of like a lighter red, but obviously not. There's no skin contact in this wine. Just very structured wines. There's really, kind of upright walls on it. The fruit is always really generous though. You get this beautiful tropical fruit notes. In terms of the actual varietals that we pick, Viognier tends to bring a really nice kind of floral component. Grenache Blanc is pure, I'm gonna use the term minerality, if you will. It's that kind of saline saltiness going on, as well as a little bit of the lemon curd, lemon peel. The Roussanne is the fatness, that's the richness in the palate. What we find when we make these wines is that you get a really high level of acid in the front end, and then really structured on the back end, but nothing's quite in the middle of the wine. That's where Roussanne comes in. It comes in, it kind of fills out the mid palate and really stretches the wine long. And then Picpoul is pure acid. It's kind of a buzzy type grape varietal for white wines, but kind of all the freshness that the wine is, that's all Picpoul for us. So I think this is the first time we've included a white wine in the wine club. I have a tremendous passion for white wine, and kind of the direction that we're pushing Resolution into is trying to tier ourselves up to really showcase what white grapes can do in Paso Robles. Because we've always been focused on red wines, this has always been kind of a one-off release for us, but when I started looking at kind of the wine club and what the story is that we want to tell with the brand, it seemed like a perfect fit for the spring. The winter months are coming to an end. It's starting to warm up a little bit. People might be looking to brighten up the palate, and it's a really nice starter in the whole lineup. It just kind of primes every taste bud in your mouth and gets us ready to move into some reds from there. The way we make this wine, everything is direct press. So basically the grapes are picked. We then bring them into the winery and we load them straight into the press. We press with a bladder press. So it's actually got an air-filled bladder on the inside and then a drain on the backside. And it gently pushes the grapes up against that drain and it squeezes out the juice. For things like Viognier and Grenache Blanc, they tend to have some bitterness to the skins, and so I'm there at the press tasting the juice as we press. As soon as we taste bitter, we cut the press. The good stuff goes into a tank, the bad stuff goes down the drain. All of the varietals are barrel fermented. Now, when I say barrel, we're using old barrels. They've already been used, so they're not imparting any new oak flavors. People are always afraid of barrel fermented whites because they've had, big, buttery, round Chardonnays. This is not that wine. What the barrel does though is that it gives us that texture, and then everything goes through malolactic fermentation, which we're gonna be coming out with a little blurb about malolactic, but essentially that's rounding it out. So we pick the grapes for acid, and then over the course of the pressing and the fermentation and the aging, they tend to soften. So when you first taste the wine, when it's just finished fermentation, I mean, it is as austere as it can get. And then over the course of aging it for about 12 to 14 months, we find that it softens, and the personality really comes together. Why don't we move on to some Pinot Noir now? So for the second wine in this release, this is our 2022 Hyperbole. Now this wine is seeing a bit of an evolution. The brand Hyperbole was originally designated for our distribution. However, we love kind of the story that it's bringing, which is essentially, here is what the Central Coast of California tastes like through the lens of Pinot Noir. So this wine is designated Central Coast. What goes into this is Pinot Noir that spans from as far north as Monterey and as far south as Santa Barbara. Anyone that is familiar with the brand will know that we produce quite a few single vineyard Pinot Noirs, which is as important as the blends. But what we really wanted to show with this was, kind of the diversity of the entire Central Coast. It's in one bottle essentially, and that is Hyperbole. What I find with Central Coast Pinot Noir, there's a real generosity of fruit, kind of like you get in Sonoma, but those fruits are always really red fruit driven. So it's always tons of raspberry, tons of cherry. In this, the vineyards that goes into this wine, it's gonna be coming from granite, it comes from sandy loam, it comes from pure sand, it comes from diatomaceous earth. There's even a little limestone in the wine. And so you get a full span of kind of the geological, diversity within the Central Coast. Almost everything though is cool climate. And Pinot Noir really thrives in a cooler climate. It's very rare for us to actually grow Pinot Noir in Paso Robles, and so we have to go towards the coast for that. Part of the draw for me to come here to work for Cordant was the diversity of vineyards and diversity of terroir, if you will. It's really rare for there to be a brand here on the Central Coast that's doing 200 miles up and down the Central Coast. Some people might focus on Slow Coast AVA, or they might focus on Monterey or Santa Barbara. We do wines from all over. And so when it comes time to actually put the blend together like Hyperbole, I'm a kid in the candy shop. I mean, there is so much diversity in the cellar that you can really create whatever wine you want. In terms of how we blend this, I mean, the wine making is pretty scientific, but how we blend it is pure intuition. And this is really kind of, when I talk with David and Deanne and Evan about, what is their favorite kind of Pinot Noir, this is our opportunity to essentially make that. This is kind of our palette of wine. Let's taste some 2021 Maniacal. So Maniacal is what a lot of people would call our GSM, Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre. The majority of this fruit is sourced from Paso Robles. Paso grows some really beautiful Grenache, some really beautiful Syrah, some beautiful Mourvedre. However, we wanted to be a little bit unique in sourcing some Syrah from cooler climate vineyards, so that requires us to go towards the coast. Places like Mesa del Sol, which is in the Santa Lucia Highlands, as well as Coast View, which is actually the next wine. We do blend a little bit of their Syrah into this guy. If I had to put two wines kind of together as brother-sister, it'd probably be Resolution and Maniacal. This is the Southern Rhone-inspired white. This is sort of the Southern Rhone-inspired red. I'm not French, so I don't know how to pronounce Mourvèdre, 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 who cares? I've always heard it as Mourvèdre. That's just how I say it. It's most notably known in regions like Bandol, which is actually in Provence. But it grows incredibly well in places like Châteauneuf-du-Pape, which is kind of what Paso Robles is kind of designed after, if you will. So in terms of the blending of this wine, really what we're trying to showcase in Maniacal is the beauty of Grenache more than anything. Grenache is a really interesting grape in that it grows huge. I mean, clusters come in this big versus Syrah clusters might be this big. It doesn't have a ton of color, but it has a lot of tannin. And so in order to get some color into the wine, we will actually co-ferment with Syrah, which means that I might pick a little bit of Grenache from one vineyard, and I'll pick just a tiny bit of Syrah, 5% from the same vineyard. We put it all together into one ferment. So it's still considered Grenache, but that Syrah lends the color to it. So we're able to bind up a lot of the tannin and give you that kind of silky texture in the wine. Once again, much like the Resolution, there's really a lot of generosity of fruit. For me, it always has, again, that kind of raspberry, but more strawberry red fruits. The Syrah is always gonna bring kind of the blue and black fruits. So you think of plum, blackberry, boysenberry, a little bit of black peppercorn, maybe some eucalyptus, you know. And then Mourvèdre is always gonna be kind of the meatiness of the wine. If you ever taste something and it has almost a sanguine kind of taste, iron sometimes, this wine has all of that, which is, you know, a perfect example of a GSM in my opinion. The way we blend this wine is also really unique. We will essentially build the best possible Syrah that we can build, which includes portions of Coast View, it includes portions, like I mentioned, of Mesa del Sol. That whole thing becomes the Syrah component to this wine, but a portion of that is blended with a little bit more Syrah to create our wine called Indicile. And then obviously Coast View is Coast View. So each wine has a little bit of each other in them, which is kind of cool. Chalkiness is what I'm going after in this wine. That's the texture component. And if you guys open up the Maniacal next to the Resolution, which I highly recommend, you'll find a similar texture in both wines. It's on the finish of the wine. So chalkiness is tannin. Much like if you drink black tea or green tea without milk or something, you'll taste kind of a dryness in your mouth. That's extracted from the grape skins. And our whole purpose of extraction during fermentation is to find that texture. If you don't have it, the wine tastes really flat on the palate. White wine, it's much harder to get that in because we don't ferment with skins, and so that's where the press is really important. But the Maniacal really shows that. Let's jump into some Syrah now. So last wine in the shipment, 2021 Coast View Syrah. This vineyard is incredibly special to us. Not a lot of people are familiar with the vineyard because it's not very easy to get to. It is just inland of Monterey, so it's quite north for us. It sits at about 2,000 feet above sea level. It overlooks the ocean, hence Coast View. And it's all grown in granite with fingers of limestone. So depending on where you pick the grapes, you might get granitic soils, you might get limestone soils. What's really interesting to me about this vineyard site is that it's cool climate in the sense that there's cooler winds that come off the ocean, but because you're so high up, you have really high solar radiation. So it's like literally the amount of sunlight is hitting the grapes. And so because of that, the grape skins tend to thicken a little bit more than if you were in a cool climate vineyard site. As a result, aromatically, the wine is cool climate, but texturally, the wine is warmer climate. So when I smell it, I think of a cool climate Syrah. When I taste it, I think of something from Paso. So it rides this like really kind of fine line. Not a lot of vineyards can do that. You can just see right off the bat, that's Syrah, super dark and inky. And part of the reason that we love this wine or this vineyard is that it gives us that blueberry note. The vineyard is also terraced, so it's up on the hill, and then within that hill, they terrace out the slopes, which is very common in Northern Rhone, which is where Syrah is from. We co-ferment a little bit of this with Viognier, which is also very common in Northern Rhone. We'll do another video on that because for some really interesting points, it actually makes the wine darker, it gives you better color, even though you're adding a white grape to it. So the other thing is that in terms of tasting the lineup, obviously we're gonna go from lightest to heaviest. This is certainly the heaviest, but Coast View Syrah has always got a real finesse side to it. We pick this mostly for acid, not for alcohol or sugar. We ferment it to build that texture, and that because it's a single vineyard, it sees a little bit of new oak. So again, that's gonna build texture. Syrah is like Cabernet in the sense that it can handle some new oak. It doesn't taste oaky by any means. If anything, it frames the fruit really well. It fleshes out that mid palate. Because I don't have as many opportunities to blend this wine and get that flesh mid palate like we did with Maniacal, we have to play with things like oak to kind of get it. I think it's respectful of the wine, and certainly the fruit shows through on this. We bottled these, let's see, last August, and they've really come together since then. We released the Indocile that was on the same bottling line earlier, and even that has come together. So if anyone still has some of that kicking around in their cellar, come back to it, taste it. You can really see how the wines have evolved, but yeah, this is beautiful. So to get the finesse in the wine, we're picking earlier than a lot of people. Traditionally, that hasn't always been the case, but these newer vintages are definitely seeing a trend towards earlier picking. Earlier picking means more acid, less alcohol. So right away, you're gonna have less extraction and a little bit more finesse in the wines. The acid to me is kind of the critical component. That's what brings the freshness and the energy in the wines. You know, you can pick anything with tons of sugar and get a huge wine, but do you really want to be coming back to that bottle, you know, over the course of the night? In terms of the extraction protocol, Syrah does really well with a lot of oxygen. So during the fermentation, we'll pump over mostly, and we'll actually hook up a Venturi to that pump. So as it's pulling the juice off the bottom of the tank and spraying it over the top, it's also sucking some air along with it. Syrah in general is a pretty reductive varietal, and so by incorporating some oxygen, it helps the wine a little bit. That is also a pretty light extraction. You can think of it kind of like pour over coffee versus French press. French press, you know, you're gonna get a bigger coffee, whereas pour over is a little bit lighter. It's the exact same techniques that we use. And as we're going through the fermentation, I'm tasting as we go and deciding when exactly it's time to pull those grapes off of the wine and press them off and put them in barrel. Taste them, you know, we got a lot of wines, so if you know, y'all want to open them all up together or you want to open by yourself, taste them over the course of a couple days even. You know, these things can stand up, especially the bigger stuff, you know, you can open them and, you know, taste them over the course of 3 days, and it's dramatic how much they change. Each one has its own kind of personality, and it's just kind of cool to go through them and sort of recognize, you know, yeah, this one's a little lighter, this one's got, you know, really good mid palate, this one has got the energy that we're talking about. So that's kind of what it's all about for me. So that's the spring 2024 wine club release. We're again really proud of these wines. You know, we've worked tirelessly to get them in bottle for you all. Hopefully one of the 4, if not all 4, resonate with you all. And yeah, please, you know, go out and enjoy them with friends, enjoy them with yourselves. That's what they're meant to be for. And yeah, we're just really excited about this release.